Overview of CPI rebasing presentation. These are the outlines I'll be discussing in this presentation. Introduction, concept of consumer price index, framework for CPI computation in Nigeria, the concept of CPI rebasing, justification for the rebasing of CPI, quality and transparency of the rebasing process, benefit of the exercise to the economic agents, challenges, status and next step, roles and responsibility of stakeholders, then conclusion. Introduction. Now, before I go to the key words in this presentation, which is CPI rebasing, how important is prices in an economy? Change in price level affects economic agents. It also affects other macroeconomic variables. When prices change, household is affected in terms of their purchasing power, which affect their satisfaction. When price level changes, it affects firm profitability, and it also affects their sustainability, existence in the market. It also affects government expenditure. When price goes up too much, it's expected that government expenditure will go up. And if this expenditure is not backed up with adequate revenue, it leads to budget deficit. Now, prices also affect other macroeconomic variables, like GDP is a function of prices. Unemployment depends on price as well. Balance of trade and balance of payment are being affected or is being affected by price level. So that tells you that price level in an economy is very important. Since it's important, the tracking of the changes in prices should be optimally done so that information can be available for the user of this indicator to take informed decisions. Now, with the foundation I've laid on the importance of prices, what is Consumer Price Index? That is CPI. CPI is an index that tracks changes in prices of goods and services consumed by household over a given period of time compared to a relative period, which we call base year. It's a relative index because it mainly focuses on changes in prices. And this change in price involves comparing prices in a recent period with a given period. And that given period is called base year, which is taken referred to as price reference period. Now, what are the uses of CPI? CPI is an input in formulation of monetary policy. Central bank depend on this indicator in adjusting their monetary policy to every time. It's also used in wages and salaries adjustments in both private sector and public sector. It is also an instrument in contract payment adjustment over time. These are some of the uses of Consumer Price Index. Now, what is the current framework for CPI computation in Nigeria? How do we compute CPI in Nigeria? Mind you, inflation rate is derived from Consumer Price Index. Currently, CPI in Nigeria has a weight and price reference period of 2009. When I say weight reference period, that is the year the survey that gave birth to the consumption pattern we use presently was conducted, and that was in 2009. Presently, we are collecting prices on over 440 varieties of items that we use to compute this indicator every month. Our classification structure presently is 1999 COICOP. COICOP is classification of the individual consumption according to purpose, which has 12 divisions for CPI purpose. And our prices data collection method is we are using paper questionnaire to collect prices across all the outlets in Nigeria. The framework continues. Now, what is the concept of CPI rebasing? CPI rebasing entails adjusting or bringing closer the two reference period. When I say two reference period, we have the price reference period and the weight reference period. Over time, the weight reference period and the price reference period become outdated. So they need to be brought closer to current period so that the CPI we get or we compute will be reflecting the current consumption pattern and also reflecting the current inflationary pressure. So that these two objectives can be optimally achieved, that means current inflationary pressure being reflected in our CPI, current consumption pattern also reflecting our CPI, we need to do what called CPI rebasing, meaning that we bring the price reference period closer to the current period so that the lag will not be too excessive. Also, consumption pattern of people in Nigeria is not static but dynamic because it's a function of many multi-factor variables like income, weather, culture, habits, technological changes, innovation. All these variables I mentioned, they change over time, meaning that consumption pattern also changes over time. So the new consumption pattern needs to be brought on board in this index computation. So when we bring the weight reference period closer to the current period, it means that we are reflecting the current consumption pattern in the computation of our CPI. So that is what CPI rebasing is all about. However, it's not limited to this. If need be, the methodology for the computation of index, if it's obsolete, needs to be reviewed as well, so that the index we get can be compared with other country index. Also, technically, rebasing should be done every five years. So that's another reason MBS is conducting this rebasing, because the last time we did rebasing was 2009, which is almost 13 or 14 years ago. So that's a good justification why the Bureau has embarked on this huge exercise. Now that I've explained what is CPI rebasing, what are the justifications for the rebasing of CPI? Number one, relative expenditure or weight of individual goods and services changes over time. I've mentioned that one earlier. Consumption pattern is a function of time, changes with time. Also, new items need to come to the CPI basket. For example, in 20 years ago, what I buy with 1,000 naira, the varieties of goods I buy with 1,000 naira may not be the same thing I buy in 2025. So meaning that the CPI basket needs to be updated to reflect what household expend their limited resources on. Also, the price reference period should not be more than 5 years compared to the current period. That's another justification for the rebasing. Also, for the index to be compared with other countries' indices, rebasing is very, very important. That is all about the justification. Now, what are the structural changes between the old and the new methodology? As I said earlier, rebasing is not limited to reviewing the reference period. If need be, methodology needs to be revisited. Some of the areas in the CPI methodology that we have reviewed is what I want to mention now compared to the old. In terms of varieties of items, we have 740 varieties of items in the old basket, but now we have 934 varieties of items. Our classification structure presently, or in the old, was 1999, but now we are moving to 2018 version of COICOP. This 2018 version has 18 divisions for CPI computation purpose, while the old one has 12 divisions. The new division we are bringing on board is called financial services and insurance. Also, paper questionnaire was our data source and data collection mechanism in the old. Now we are digitalizing our data collection process. Price reference period 2009 in the old, presently is 2024. I will talk more about this. Then our relative index computation in the old method is long-term relative. Now we are using short-term relative. Why change? The short-term relative enables us to substitute item when need be and also substitute outlet when need be. But the long-term relative cannot do that. So that is the justification for moving from long-term relativity to short-term relativity. And in addition to what I've said, 2024 has been chosen as the price reference period. Why 2024? The year that the weight reference period was composed, or the year the expenditure data was gathered, was 2023. So technically, after the 2023 and weight reference period, the year after is 2024. And that is the year we have chosen as price reference period. And if you go to the CPI manual, chapter 9, section 9.27, clearly states that the price reference period should be a year that precedes the year the figure will be released. So we are releasing the figure in 2025. The year that precedes 2025 is 2024. So our price reference period is the year 2024. Another justification for this is that it will help us to compute change in prices that reflect current economic reality, not changes that is too wide from the current period. Also, another thing I want to say is that the Nigeria Living Standard Survey was the major survey on which the weighting process was anchored. And this survey was done for 12 months, January 2025, 2023 to December 2023. So this survey was elaborate. That gave us the expenditure pattern of Nigeria. Also, the Bureau also conducted survey of rare items to augment the Nigeria Living Standard Survey of 2023. Why all this? So that we can be able to get a robust data that depict consumption pattern of people living in Nigeria. Thank you. Structural change between the old and the new. Yeah, from this I have here, the weight structure has changed. Division 1, which we call food and non-alcoholic beverage, presently have 40.02% as weight, compared to 51.8%, meaning that the weight structure for this division has changed. But mind you, that does not mean what Nigeria spend on this division has reduced as depicted by the figure. No. One of the factors responsible for this decline is the restructuring in the weighting structure. For example, in the old method, meal away from home was part of division 1. But now it's no longer in division 1. It has been moved to division 11, which is restaurant and accommodation. So that is one of the reasons why it seems as if the weight of food and non-alcoholic reduce. MBS does not reduce weight. This weight we have gotten now is the result of the survey conducted. This is what the survey says. Another thing I will talk about is housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel. It was 16.7, but now it's 8.4. Why this decline? In the old method, that's what we call imputed rent. Imputed rent was part of this expenditure in the old method, but now our weighting is purely monetary. Any expenses that is not monetary wise is excluded in the weighting. So that is why imputed rent is no longer part of the expenditure captured in this new CPI rebasing. Also, if you look at education as well, educational services, yes, educational service increase, that is expected. A lot of people are patronizing educational services now, being a necessity, no longer a luxury. That is a factor. Even health as well. Health also increased from 3.0 to 6.1. Health is very, very highly a necessity, and its demand is highly inelastic. So whatever the price of health facility, people must access it. So those are some of the logical reasons why all these weights shift forward and why some decline. Also, on division 11, when we have restaurant and accommodation, that was a huge shift from 1.2 to 12.9. Apart from an inclusion of meal away from home, that accommodation service here also include the expenditure of Nigerians and people living in Nigeria on hostel. The money we spend on accommodating our students in schools from the lowest level to highest level is part of this expenditure. So that explains why we have a huge shift in that division. That means our students that are in primary school living in boarding, what their parents spend on their on accommodation in the school, from primary school to tertiary education, is a factor that explains this huge shift. So that is all about the weight. Then another thing I want to draw attention to is that apart from our normal sub indices like food, core, urban, rural, the Bureau has introduced new 4 special indices based on demand and also based on necessity. One of them is services index, which will be computed nationally and state-wise. Yes, why this? If you look at our GDP, service contributes a significant portion to the growth of the economy. So we need to know the rates at which prices in this sector move. Also, energy index. We know how important energy is to our economy. At what rate is price fluctuating in this sector? The energy index will give us the inflation rates in this sector. Also, farm produce as well, both national and state. At what rate is inflation disturbing this sector? This indicator will show us the inflationary pressure in the farming sector. Also, good index as well. Okay. Quality and transparency of the rebasing process. What I'm trying to pass across here is that the Bureau did not just gather data on its own and say we have rebased. The process was open, and also it involved other organizations. For example, International Monetary Fund (IMF) was fully involved in the process. Our data was open to them. They provided technical support that leads to the success of this rebase result. They visited Nigeria in 4 different missions. Also, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, also recommended a consultant. And the consultant came, look at the processes, look at the data, and supported technically as well in the rebase result. This consultant was sponsored by World Bank, so mean that World Bank also was involved in the rebasing process. Even Central Bank was not excluded. They were involved in the weighting process as well. So meaning that the Bureau was open and transparent in the processes that leads to the rebase CPI. What are the benefits of this exercise? Yeah, to government, it will help government in making informed decisions on things related to price change and inflation as well. It will help central bank in their monetary policy formulation. With new rebase CPI now, we know the current inflationary pressure and the trajectory of adjustment of the monetary policy instrument. That will be a good information for them. It also helps producers as well, because with the new weighting structure now, it will help producers to know what to produce, because we know that these are the weighting structure of people living in Nigeria, and that means what they spend their resources on. Producers will know the area to produce more and what to produce less. So these are some of the benefits. Even to Nigerian citizens, people living in Nigeria, you can optimally measure what the money in your account, what the money in your purses can buy. That means the purchasing power of your income can be optimally measured and determined. Now, what are the challenges encountered in this rebasing exercise? One of it is cultural limitation, which affect our data collection. Access to people to collect data is a problem. The lack of adequate understanding of statistical figure is a problem, and that's one of the reasons why we are sensitizing the figure and the masses and our stakeholders, so that when the result is out, understanding the figure and interpreting it is very, very important. Now, what is the next step now? The next step is this: we are going to compute a new CPI in January based on 2024 price reference and 2023 weight reference. And this result will be linked to the old series, so that we can have a series of CPI with the new price reference period and the new weight reference period. And by the grace of God, very soon, a new CPI will be released, which will be validated by the critical stakeholder, and result will be announced by the Statistician General. What is the role of Nigeria? The role of Nigeria and other stakeholders is to understand the figure and help to pass across to Nigerians and other people that NBS is rebasing CPI It's not for the interest of any person. It's for the interest of the whole people living in Nigeria and for the interest of the three economic agent government, firm, household, and even for international community as well. In conclusion, the rebate CPI will help us to produce inflation rates that reflect current economic reality, not accumulated lag in the economic condition in the past, but the current economic reality is what our inflation figure will be depicting as we rebase the CPI. Inflation is not only peculiar to Nigeria, it's a global macroeconomic problem that both monetary and fiscal authorities are battling to find solution to. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.